Coming up next, wolves have arrived in Idaho, but who will manage them? We'll explore the issue and take your calls next on Dialogue.
Funding for Dialogue is provided by the Friends of Idaho Public Television and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Welcome to Dialogue. I'm Marcia Franklin. It's been said that a wolf can take your stare and turn it back on you. In those piercing eyes, some see a threat, others a triumph. Most people, though, will never see a wolf in their lifetime, except perhaps in a zoo. But those of us in this part of the West will have a better chance as of this week. 12 gray wolves have been released in central Idaho and Yellowstone National Park. 12 of 200 wolves the United States Fish and Wildlife Service hopes to reintroduce to those areas over the next 5 years. The program is the culmination of years of public debate, a debate that prompted the largest number of comments ever on an environmental impact statement. But now that the wolves are here, what's next? One plan calls for the Idaho Department of Fish and Game to manage the animals. But state lawmakers have changed that plan so much it may not be accepted by the federal government, which might negotiate instead with the Nez Perce Indian tribe. Some of those lawmakers, as well as ranching groups, say the wolves shouldn't be here at all and are hoping that the reauthorization of the Endangered Species Act will halt the process. But some environmentalists say the federal government has already conceded too much to the livestock interests. Now with me to discuss these and other issues tonight and take your phone calls are Ted Koch, Director of the Wolf Recovery Effort for Idaho for the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, and Dr. Greg Nelson, who is the Director of Public Affairs for the Idaho Farm Bureau. And our toll-free number is 1-800-973-9800. First you, Mr. Koch. I heard today, or I've heard comments that I think the quote was that there's a contrived haste about doing this, that perhaps the service is expecting that there will be changes to the Endangered Species Act, and therefore you're hurriedly introducing these wolves before something happens.
I've heard that reported before, Marcia, and the wolf was listed as an endangered species in 1973. Congress directed in 1991 that the service proceed with plans for reintroducing wolves to Idaho and Yellowstone. We completed the EIS process and the rulemaking process in an appropriate period of time with public comment periods, and we're ready to go actually as early as November. We then delayed for a couple of reasons, including to make sure that we make sure that Judge could hear the Farm Bureau's concerns, and now we're ready to go.
I've also heard you say, and Ed Bangs, who's the director of the program, that wolves are here whether we like it or not, that they will eventually be here.
That's right. There's maybe a handful of lone wolves in Idaho, and that's been the case on and off for years. And with the reintroduction program, though, we can speed up the recovery process, shorten the length of time that we have to manage the species as endangered, and in the long run save the taxpayer money by achieving our recovery goals more quickly.
Dr. Nelson, today the Idaho legislature, or a committee there, the House Resources Committee, approved what's been known as the bold print plan, as opposed to the first wolf management plan that was drafted, right. So-called because in bold print there were things added, requests by the legislature, and I believe we have a graphic that illustrates some of those requests that were put in today and passed and sent to the floor. One is that the federal government should provide compensation to livestock owners for all losses and to all people economically affected by land use restrictions. Another request was that livestock owners should be able to kill wolves that hurt domestic animals, including guard dogs, on private, state, and leased federal land. Another request by the legislature, different from the initial plan, was that the management program should be discontinued if money for the wolf recovery effort is reduced or withdrawn. And finally, in the bold print plan, is that the federal government should bear all expenses associated with the legal defense of the management plan. Why does the Farm Bureau support these and other parts of the bold print plan or the corrections to the original plan?
Well, Marcia, the Farm Bureau originally, had a suit where we really didn't approve of wolves being listed nor of wolves being brought into Idaho. The plan that the legislature adopted today to manage wolves, we're basically in favor of, because it puts a decidedly Idaho twist on the management of an endangered species. We feel that, and the legislature apparently felt that if we're going to have an endangered species brought to us by the federal government, then we should have the right to accept that species with some of our own concerns cared
But
about.
has not the service listened to a lot of those concerns? I mean, you've got people on the other side, some environmentalists, saying that in fact they've bent over backwards to listen to some concerns and in fact have listed the wolf as part of an experimental population which allows livestock owners to harass it or in some instances kill it if necessary.
Well, under the non-essential experimental design, yes, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service did allow certain modifications, but you have to remember that this is really one of the first times this has been tried. So a lot of the things that we're asking for could very well have been granted without going to the legislature and them having to take a stand.
There was a suit, an injunction or suit filed at the last moment to try and stop the wolf reintroduction. Why wait until then? Why did the American Farm Bureau do that?
The suit was really based upon whether the Canadian gray wolf should be listed as endangered at all. You know, there's some experts that say that the wolf that was originally in Idaho is a different subspecies than the Canadian gray wolf. So and it seemed odd to us, meaning the Farm Bureau, that you could take a species that's 200 miles from our border, where it's hunted and where it's trapped, and bring it across the political boundary and then declare it endangered.
Will you accept this bold print plan, and do you have any other comments on what he's just said?
I guess I can't comment on whether or not we'd accept the bold print plan until we see it, although the things that we've heard reported would likely be unacceptable.
Well,
to
for
the
instance, the
service.
federal government has already said it will not compensate.
That's correct, and that's a policy far larger than just the wolf issue itself.
Why is that? Why is there?
Different states have different policies on this according to local government interests, and my understanding is that once the federal government opens the door to a compensation policy, of course, much with our litigious society and our legal system as the way it is, the opportunity for that to get away from us is pretty high.
And your comment about the wolves being just 200 miles away anyway?
Yeah, that's true. The wolves are 200 miles away. The maximum known dispersal distance for wolves recorded so far by scientists is 540 miles. And it's highly likely that a few of the wolves that have been showing up in Idaho over the last couple of decades are wolves from Alberta. But we also have to remember that the Endangered Species Act, the purpose that Congress stated in the Endangered Species Act is to protect the ecosystems upon which a threatened and endangered species depend. And that's the point of this whole reintroduction program, is that by restoring the wolf to Idaho, we're one step closer to restoring a complete ecosystem.
Okay, let's take some of our calls tonight. Rex from Boise, are you there?
Yes.
Yes, what is your question, please?
Well, I'd just like to make a statement that a lot of this is public land that this is going to be happening on. And the livestock industry is already on the public dole with all the grazing fees that don't anywhere near meet the requirements of getting a cash back into the public till. And that's my tax money. I have a right to say that I want wolves on there.
Okay. Thanks very much for your call, Rex. Dr. Nelson, there was a study apropos of this done by Boise State University that showed overwhelmingly, that statewide survey, that people do support the reintroduction of wolves. Why does not the Farm Bureau take that into account?
Well, you know, the poll, there weren't many ranchers and farmers that were asked. It's the ranchers and farmers whose livestock are at risk, not the people in the cities.
What about this issue that the gentleman posed, that you already are on public lands getting some benefit from it?
Well, it's true that in this state, 66% of the land in Idaho is public land. And it's true that 80% of our livestock hit and graze on public lands at some times during their life. But you have to remember that agriculture contributes almost 40% of all the dollars circulating in Idaho. So that means if the public lands are tied up and non-used, the gentleman that says it's his tax money is going to have to be appreciably increased if we do away with about 40% of the economy of the state.
Okay, let's take another caller here. Roy in Idaho Falls, are you there?
Yes, I am. I'd like to know just exactly how they could justify calling a wolf an endangered species when in Minnesota they're having to kill them because they've become such a problem. They've even attacked a little boy. That is fact.
Okay, thanks very much for your call. Mr. Koch, this issue has come up. You know, there are wolves in other parts of the United States, obviously in Alaska as well. Perhaps it bears explaining again why they're considered endangered here.
Yeah, as I mentioned, again, the purpose stated by Congress in the Endangered Species Act is to protect the ecosystems upon which threatened and endangered species depend. Wolves in Minnesota don't mean much to us Idahoans here in the northern Rocky Mountains. And the other statement about a little boy being attacked would be, if that's true, it would be the first time in the history of European settlement of North America that that's occurred. And we'd like to have that information. Now, there are a lot of wolves controlled in Minnesota right now, specifically in order to protect livestock operations in Minnesota, and the control actions are taken out by an arm of the federal government in cooperation with the Fish and Wildlife Service, just as control actions take place similarly in Montana and would take place similarly here.
There was, I heard in testimony that there was some 50,000 petitions against the wolf reintroduction. Some people felt that they were ignored by the Fish and Wildlife Service.
Yeah, as you mentioned at the outset of your show, Marcia, this environmental impact statement process had a record number of contributors, commenters. Over 160,000 people commented during this EIS process. We've spent a great deal of time and energy and money going to folks in rural communities and communities in the region and even communities nationwide, attempting to make sure that we reflected a cross-section of the public's opinion.
It's true that many of the communities, they did have hearings in. And I think that in all of the comments, if they were all tallied in the towns that were most affected, you'd find that there was not a majority that wanted wolf reintroduction.
Is this an issue, though, that goes larger than Idaho, and should the comments not be taken from the whole United States?
Well, certainly it is a national issue, but the people at risk and the people that are going to have wolves in their back door is not the New Yorkers or the rest of the United States. And certainly, as a country, we have a right to express our opinion. But I would think that the communities most affected would probably should weigh somewhat more heavy than Central Park, New York.
Marcia, I am very sensitive to that, and fortunately have some specific information in that regard. For the last 2 years, I've visited as many rural communities as I've been able to in Idaho, and spoken with Idahoans in places like Bonners Ferry, Elk City, Chalice, Salmon, Du Bois, about their feelings about wolf recovery and or wolf reintroduction. And universally, in all of these communities, when it gets right down to it, folks really aren't as concerned about wolves themselves as they are concerned about federal government regulations. And that's the beauty of the plan that the Fish and Wildlife Service has developed. It's the best compromise we can strike, and I think an example of that is the fact that we're being sued by both sides. And it invites the state to become a cooperator in managing wolves, which is really what the legislators, the people the legislators represent, want most of all. They want a buffer in managing these wolves. They want somebody down the street, not necessarily having to have somebody in Boise to go to when they have a problem with wolves.
Okay, well, let's hear from some more people on the phone lines. Bill in Homedale.
Hi.
Yes.
As the person here in Idaho that pays the bill on our wildlife, the hunter and the fisherman, I think it's absolutely ludicrous that we would bring in a predator. It's like if I was a chicken farmer, why would I want to let a fox in my hen house? Now, you know, I'm about tired of this no management and poor management philosophy on our wildlife in Idaho.
So
We've done a very good job of managing the wolf in the past by exterminating it from the state. I think it's absolutely crazy that it's brought back in, and I'd like to ask the Fish and Game to give one valid reason why we would want a predator of this magnitude on our depleting game herds as they are now.
Okay, thanks very much for your call. I have heard it said, or actually that someone said in testimony this week, that the ecological niche that used to be held by the wolf is now held by the sportsman in terms of hunting game. How do you answer this man's comment?
Well, my agency in part represents hunting interests.
And of course you're with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife.
Thank you for clarifying that. I'm very
Not
sensitive to
the
that.
Idaho Department of Fish
That's
and
right.
Game.
And my agency in part represents hunters' interests, and most specifically, I personally am a hunter. And I would like to think that my heart is big enough and my mind is open enough to welcome a few wolves back into the state. We're not talking about a great number. As a matter of fact, if we are able to achieve our recovery goals of 10 breeding pairs or 10 packs of wolves in Idaho, we're talking about a total of 1,600 elk and deer per year statewide, which is statistically insignificant when you look at the number of elk and deer we have in the state.
Have you encountered more resistance from sportsman groups or from livestock groups?
Both.
Yeah, actually, that's not a bad way to put it, Greg. And really, the issue is not so much an issue of what is the specific interest of the group. It's an issue of how people feel, I think, about federal government regulations. Again, I talk to ranchers. Most ranchers that I talk to are hunters, and most of these folks admit that they'd kind of be intrigued or excited to see a wolf in the distance. It would add to their hunting experience, say.
Okay.
As long as they are able to continue to hunt deer and elk, as long as they're able to continue to ranch, then they'd accept that.
Now we do have David Langhorst on the line from Ketchum. David, you're with the group that supports the Wolf Reintroduction effort. You've been listening to this conversation. Do you have any comments?
I do. I guess the first thing I wanted to point out is that this idea for an experimental reintroduction plan first came up from Senator Jim McClure, who was not a liberal in any stretch, by any stretch, and it's a plan that was designed to respond to the livestock depredations and to totally minimize land use restrictions. And a lot of these claims are just, I think, an attempt to sabotage a victory for the Endangered Species Act. And I'd like to ask Dr. Nelson, he mentioned something about livestock ranching being 40% of the economy of the state. I think there needs to be a clarification of that.
Agriculture.
Agriculture.
Yes.
So this is going to, wolf recovery is going to affect agriculture.
Livestock.
That he was making with mentioning 40% of the economy of the state.
Livestock interests and our livestock industry account for about 50% of all agriculture receipts in the state. So the impacts of wolf recovery or any Endangered Species Act, as was mentioned here, we're very concerned about the tie-up of the multiple uses in all, tie-up of water, tie-up of everything. If it plays out to the nth degree, agriculture will be giving in a good many areas of the Endangered Species Act, and it has a potential to affect 40% of the economy.
Okay, well, let's just look at what's happened in Montana. Now, in the last 2 years, and they're up to about 80 wolves in Montana now, there has been one incident of predation up there by wolves, and that resulted in the death of 2 calves, which were paid for out of this depredation fund that the Defenders of Wildlife is paying for. What scientific evidence do you have that makes you believe that there's a greater threat for Idahoans?
Well, you know, everyone uses statistics that I've not seen. Everyone talks about incidences and all that seem to be different groups putting out different information. Ranchers in Montana have called us and said, for heaven's sake, do not take any more wolves, and certainly don't get into a management or let Fish and Wildlife manage them. So, you know, each group has its own opinions on this, and our fear, of course, is the fact that eventually we're going to have a lot of wolves. Eventually we're going to have restrictions that we don't like, and eventually we're going to have livestock lost.
Okay.
And we need that.
David, thanks very much for your call. We're going to need to move on to some other callers. I appreciate you staying on the line, though.
Thank you very much.
Jane in Clarkston.
Yes,
Are you?
I'm here.
Are you there? Okay, great.
I feel that $7 million is way too much. We're trying to balance the budget, and we've got to start somewhere. You know, and the wolves were doing great where they were. And that's, you know, the way I feel.
Great. Well, thanks for your call, and thanks for waiting.
Actually, this brings up the great paradox. One of the things that the legislature mentioned today is that if funding is withdrawn from wolf management, then all wolf restoration activities should be stopped. Now, incidentally, here in Boise, the Fish and Wildlife Service office's staff has just been reduced by about 40% as of 2 months ago. So really what we're doing is within the service, we're robbing from Peter to pay Paul. That is, this is not an additional burden on the taxpayer above and beyond the service's programming. We've unfortunately had to let go of staff to maintain several programs. This being such an incredibly popular program nationwide is one of the ones that made the cut and is going forward.
What will happen if the state is chosen to manage the plan and in the reauthorization of the act or some other way, money is withdrawn? Will the state be left with the bill?
No, that's not the case. The Fish and Wildlife Service cannot surrender management authority of endangered species to any other entity. That's the way the law reads right now. We provide funding to the state to implement a management plan. And fortunately, I think one of the benefits of having such a high profile species as the wolf is with such a tremendous amount of political interest, including by the Idaho delegation, is that the budget for wolf recovery should be pretty safe.
Okay, let's go to another call here. Eric in Boise, are you there?
Yeah.
Your comment, please.
Yeah, I've talked to a rancher in central Idaho in the past, and he had some depredation by black bears, and he just figured it was the cost of doing business, and I submit likewise that what few domestic animals lost are just the cost of doing business.
Okay, thanks very much for your comment, Dr. Nelson.
Well, you know, I think our ranchers have been pretty liberal in the way that they have used or have taken the abuse on public lands. I think that they have, in fact, because there was no depredation monies, they have taken losses.
Why not just go with this private program, the Defenders of Wildlife, instead of trying to get the federal government to provide compensation, which it has said over and over and over again it will not do, and thereby possibly jeopardize the plan being managed by the state of Idaho?
Well, the Defenders of Wildlife, their program does not last indefinitely. It only lasts until the first 26 wolves or 16 wolves or whatever it was. Then it's withdrawn. And we feel if the federal government is insistent they're going to put wolves into Idaho, then they're going to have to pay for whatever problems those wolves create.
Is this an impasse?
I'm not sure it is. As I mentioned, most ranchers in Idaho, I think, are pretty sensitive to wildlife. At least that's been the experience that I've had with ranchers in rural communities, and they enjoy hunting, they enjoy wildlife. I think they just want to make sure that there are not onerous federal government regulations which prevent them from earning a livelihood. Now, if we look to Montana for an example again, and we're very fortunate in Idaho to have Montana as an example, in the history of wolf recovery in Montana, which over the last 10 years, there's been a total of, I think, 19 cows and 12 sheep killed, which when you consider the hundreds of thousands of livestock in western Montana, it's a very small portion. Now, a potential problem could occur if that was all one operator's cows and sheep, and that is specifically why we have a wolf control program set up. And so far in Montana, we've had a 100% success rate in controlling livestock depredation events in cooperation with animal damage control.
Okay, let's go to Dennis in Soda Springs.
Yes, I'd like to find out or ask what is to stop the cattlemen and sheepmen and all that from going into the, like, say, Yellowstone Park and killing these wolves and bringing them out and claiming the $500 whatever bounty it is on these wolves. There isn't enough Fish and Game officers to stop them all.
Okay, very good. Thanks for your question. Who will be monitoring this? And again, the subject of this program, if we don't have a state management plan yet, and the wolves are here, who's going to be on the ground making sure that people are not illegally hunting wolves?
The Fish and Wildlife Service, here in Idaho, in cooperation with the Nez Perce tribe, will be managing wolves.
How seriously are you negotiating with the Nez Perce tribe right now?
They'll be a partner in wolf management in Idaho.
With or without the state signing
With or without the state, that's right.
To the plan?
We'll probably seek to ask more of the Nez Perce than we would have with state involvement, simply because there's that much more work that we need to get done now without the state as a cooperator.
Okay.
But all wolves that are reintroduced to Idaho are radio collared for a number of reasons, for health reasons, as Dr. Nelson's familiar with, for reasons of being able to monitor their recovery, and perhaps most importantly for reasons of monitoring the animals' well-being themselves. And every radio-collared wolf has a mortality mode that the collar will go on, so for each wolf that's killed, we'll be able to find out very quickly and pursue it.
Okay, we have time for one more call, I believe. Bonnie in Boise, are you there?
Yes.
Yes.
I would just like to say that it makes me really sick that we as a nation have been looking at this animal as Little Red Riding Hood did, and we can't say that this is a big bad wolf. We can't substitute our materialistic needs for something that Mother Nature intended.
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Nelson, I'm sure that you've heard that comment, that the myth of the wolf has long been outgrown, and that people feel that they'd like to see wolves back in the ecosystem.
Certainly, we have heard it. And like I say, a few wolves, I don't think anyone is too concerned about. What we're worried about is these wolves are going to be well fed. That means they're going to breed well. We're going to have a lot of wolves in the future. We need some assurances that when wolves, and there are problem wolves, they talk of problem wolves, and these problem wolves attack domestic livestock, and they attack dogs, and they can attack working llamas and things like this. What we want is some assurance that we don't have to face this in the future, that it will be taken care of.
We have about 30 seconds left. Mr. Koch, what's coming down the pike? How long will you wait for the Idaho State Legislature to decide whether it wants to work with you on the ground terms that you've set?
Well, the legislature's already decided in the short term in our eyes. However, in the future, we hope that to have the state as a cooperator, and at least eventually when we recover and delist wolves, when they begin to get up to numbers, right, I think that Greg's referring to, then once wolves are delisted, the state will be able to manage them probably comparable to how they manage black bears and mountain lions right now.
Okay, so you will be negotiating with the Nez Perce tribe then, sounds like.
We've already been negotiating,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks to both of my guests tonight on this discussion. This is a topic that will continue. Dr. Greg Nelson of the Idaho Farm Bureau and Ted Koch of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. That's all tonight for Dialogue. Next week we'll talk to the president of Lockheed in Idaho about the future of the Idaho National Engineering Laboratory, and we welcome your calls then too. Good night.
Dialogue is a production of Idaho Public Television and is funded by the Friends of Idaho Public Television and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
To purchase a videotape of this program, please contact Idaho Public Television at 1-800-543-6868.